Thanks, Jayaji, for taking your time.
Well, thank you, Dambara, for you taking the time and bringing all this equipment here to the house. So it's if I can be of service to you, I will.
It's a delight visiting in your home. Yeah. So you've been around a long time.
I have been around. I've been around on this earth plane for a little bit. I'm in mid-70s. But I've been here at Ananda also for a good amount of time.
Yeah. Why don't we just go back to the beginning? I mean, tell me a little bit about the early life, family life, your upbringing, whether your family was religious, spiritual, whatever, and then how you came to Ananda.
Yeah, how I ended up here, and it's a journey for each one of us. I think each one of us have our history, individual uniqueness of it, but then probably there's a common feature. I think everybody who ends up on the spiritual path ends up coming to Master. I thought I found Master, but when I look back on it, I think it was actually Master found me and guided me, because I think in retrospect, devotee looks back on their life and they see, if that wouldn't have happened, that happened. It all seems at the time maybe serendipitous, but really it's in a sense, was it a divine plan? I like to think of it that way. I grew up in Los Angeles and in a working class neighborhood. My dad was a carpenter, and my stepmother, my mom died when I was 1 year old, but later on my dad remarried, and she was a housewife and also a beautician, had a beauty shop at one point. And it was nothing particularly unusual, just basic working class. I grew up, went to school in LA and high school in LA, but I remember very, very distinctly wanting to get out of school, or not so much school, I like school, but wanting to get out of that environment, the stuff that goes on in high school, and just, I wanted something else in life. There had to be something more. And I ended up going to UCLA college, and I was so looking forward to that. And actuality, I graduated on a Friday night and moved on Saturday. And I moved actually my family was moving to a different location. I moved, never went back. And within 24 hours, I was totally somewhere else. And then didn't even stay with my parents for very long. Moved on to a different location myself. And then it was like a sense of freedom, doing life, getting high school in the background. But I was looking forward to going to college, which I did. I went to college at UCLA, and I was there for a little over 2 years. Then I transferred to Berkeley, and you have to remember the context of all of this. This was in the 1960s. I graduated in high school in 64, UCLA, and then was in Berkeley for 67 and 68 from where I graduated. And those were interesting times, let's just say that. And all of that went with it, and particularly that location where I was in both of those schools. But I have to say, I enjoyed college. I was an anthropology major at that time. I enjoyed school. I like school. I like, there's more to school than study. I like the environment. I made a lot of good friends and people. And it opened up a world to me, because I had grown up in, like I say, my neighborhood. It was a little bit, I wouldn't say it was a rough neighborhood, but it's definitely working class, the blue collar neighborhood. And English wasn't always spoken in my home, so I didn't have my facility with English. I thought was great when I was there, but then when I went to college, I could see that everybody else was a lot more fluid and a lot more socially adept. And I could see that, I'd been an A student in high school. I was really not an A student in college, so I had to struggle a little bit to keep up. But I did. And I graduated eventually, but by the time I got out of college, I was done with school. I was done. I loved the friends and, all the things we did and all of the fun activities of that time. But my interest had gone somewhere else. But that was an interesting time because you begin to, by the time you're a senior in college, and I wanted to get out and go and do something. But what? What do you do at that time? And those ideas and questions began to arise in my mind of what do I do? And I had no idea, but I knew what I did not want to do. I did not want to get stuck somewhere, and like where I grew up. I absolutely had no interest in making money. I had no, the idea of going to work every day in some corporate office was just absolutely out of the question. I wanted adventure. I wanted to do something, you're young, you want to do something exciting, but I didn't know what that was. But I definitely, the idea of joining the corporate world was not something for me. And I guess you could say I was interested in going back to the language of the 60s. I was interested in counterculture, all of those things and doing different things and lead into different life. And I was also, if I have to say, I self-identify as very idealistic. Politics took my interest in those days. I was at Berkeley after all. And but there's a lot of things happening in society at that time. Civil rights, feminism, I have obviously the big one, Vietnam War. All of that was playing out in the background. And in the political action in those areas, I was active in that. But even that, I have to say, by the time I graduated, I saw the limitations of that as well. And so I wasn't really, I knew that really wasn't the answer. I had to a sense that I needed to do something. I needed to put my ideals into action, is what it was. And how am I going to do that? So and I had friends, and we were all somewhat in the same boat. And that ultimately, I think, was the background of led me to taking up the spiritual path. And those latter years in college, I began to be attracted to Eastern philosophy. I began to take classes actually in world literature, particularly in world literature of India, read the Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, read the well, nobody reads the whole Mahabharata, but I read the condensed version. And all of, those things, Shakuntala, Kalidas, all of those bhakti poets. And I became interested in that, but I wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say spirituality, but metaphysics I was interested in. And remember, some of you who perhaps remember those days, the authors that were popular, Alan Watts, some of you remember Alan Watts, or Dambara, you remember Alan Watts, or Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha, the book Siddhartha, and these sorts of things in literature and all the things like that. And then also, it was interesting at that time, there was a movement of, we could say, Indian teachers were starting to come to America. And of course, the famous one was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And I went to one of his lectures, and he seemed like a very nice man. I wasn't personally attracted to him personally, but I liked him. And the idea of taking up meditation, I thought, that's a way to put my ideals into action. I can do that. And there happened to be on campus a weekly meditation by a teacher by the name of Eknath Eshwaran. And I would go to that. I met him, and I would go to his meditations, and I would go to the Vedanta Center. And these became attractive to me and putting into motion. And so I did, and I attended those things. And that ultimately led me to a lot of reading, a lot of study. But you have to, I don't want to come off sounding like I was that was my life. I mean, really, my life was my friends, having a good time, going to parties, all of the things that are associated with that in the 1960s, you can imagine. And that was me. But there was this other part behind the scenes that said, what am I going to do? Where am I going? What's happening? What's trying to happen here? That was under the surface, and that's kind of a little bit of background. I could go into other things, but I don't know. What, you might want to ask me some questions.
Just one question comes up when you talked about that there wasn't much English spoken in your family. What do you mean by that?
Well, it wasn't, English was when I was there, but English was, it was like a second language. My father and my stepmother and my biological mother also were from Finland. And all my relatives were from Finland, and they were immigrants, and they had come to this country. So consequently, and the whole social circle of my family's friend, my parents' generation of their friends were Finn. And so there was social occasions revolved around the Finnish immigrant community in Los Angeles from my family side. And some of our neighbors were Finn, and so Finn was spoken. And, you know, of course, when I didn't speak Finn, although I could understand at that time a little bit, but you know how it is when parents want to have a private conversation where the kids don't understand, they reverted to Finn. But Finn was going back in there, and, you know, and my dad didn't speak English well, although he was fluent. He was fluent, but there was an immigrant's limited vocabulary Finn. And so it was part of my home life was that. And so I wish, you know, no, I guess that's not really, I don't wish I spoke Finn, but because I'm putting the effort into it. But if I had been, in some ways it sounds like it would have been a nice thing. My brother, by the way, I have an elder brother, he spoke Finn. But he was 13 years older than I.
Okay, so how did you come to Ananda?
Well, yeah, I guess that does lead up to that, doesn't it? And then, you know, I was fortunate in a lot of ways. I've been very, very fortunate. I look back, and I think anybody who's come onto this path like this looks back, how I could have gone in so many different directions, you know, relationships here and there, and somehow I ended up, because I wanted, something else was trying to happen. I didn't know what it was, but I just, deep in my heart, I was just searching for something. I wanted to know truth, really. Now I look back on it, what is this? What is this? What's going on here? And I think that under the surface, that propelled me. And eventually, of course, I was scholarly in my way, and I would do a lot of reading, and I read a lot of metaphysical books, and was aware of other religions and so on. And there was a bookstore in Berkeley. I don't know if it's still there, probably not, but it was a metaphysical bookstore, Shambhala Books, on Telegraph Avenue. And I would go in there regularly, buying different things. And I went in there one day and I saw a book with the orange cover, which is Autobiography of a Yogi. And I saw that book there, and I opened it up and I read the first 2 pages or so, 2-3 pages of it. And Yogananda, in those first few pages, talks about memories of past lives in Himalayan snows and yogis. And I closed the book. I said, this is, I thought it was a fantasy, you know, guy, because I don't know if you remember, any of you remember Dambara Lapsang Rampa. He wrote fantasies, these spiritual fantasies, which were very popular in those days, you know, the wandering Tibetan Lama runs into all sorts of adventures. I thought, this is another one like that. And I closed the book and went on. But that was on a Sunday, I believe it was on a Sunday, or Saturday. And then a few days later, another Sunday, about a week later, nothing was happening on a Sunday. And I was out walking in the neighborhood, and I don't know if I should use the word vision, but a image flashed in my mind, like at the spiritual eye. An image flashed in my mind of a orange-colored book, Autobiography of a Yogi, flashed in my mind, And I thought, well, and I stopped. What was that? You know, and I thought of it, and that impression was so strong. I said, I got to go buy that book. And I immediately turned directions and went to the bookstore, and I bought that book. And I sat down and started reading it. And like Swami says, when he bought the book, he read it cover to cover. It's practically like that. I sat in a chair and, you know, and I just read that book over a period of 2 or 3 days. And cover to cover, finished it and put it aside, and then wondered, well, now what do I do? I had no idea what the next step was. I had been told that there was some reference to you could get some lessons or follow up with that, but I'd never read that. And so I put it aside, and I thought, well, that was a wonderful book. And about 1 week later, after, it was a Sunday I bought the book. I probably finished it by Wednesday or Thursday. And it wasn't that next Sunday, but it was a Sunday after that. So it had been 2 Sundays after I bought the book. I was listening to the radio one morning. I woke up, and I was at a favorite rock and roll station that it was always on. And I turned it on to cleaning up the house after a Saturday mela in our apartment. It was a mess. And so I thought, I got to clean this place up. And so I cleaned it up. And as I was cleaning up, I put this radio on in the background. And as I was doing that, I heard somebody, music didn't come on, but there was it was one of those public service programs that they used to have in those days that stations used to run, let people have some free time. And it was somebody talking about some religious subject. And then at the very end of it, there was reference to, I heard the name Paramahansa Yogananda, and immediately I perked up. And I went and I said, what's that? You know, I just read that book. And it was a fellow talking about how he was a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and that he was going to be giving some classes, and he named 3 or 4 cities, one of which was Berkeley, in the coming week or few weeks. If I was interested, anybody interested, send him a postcard. I scribbled down the address, I sent a postcard off. And of course, that was Swami Kriyananda, who was doing at that time, lived in San Francisco. This was in 1968. And lived in San Francisco, and I sent that off, and sure enough, postcard came back a couple of weeks later for that night. The night obviously, whoever was helping him waited to the last minute, because it was that night I had to make a decision, which there's a story on that, which I'll skip, but I did. I went to that class, and I met Swami, and he was giving on University Avenue on the west side of San Pablo, a little storefront he had rented there for the night. 6-week class on Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga. And I went that, and Swami showed up that night and began the class series. And I was very attracted. And he would do first a Hatha Yoga, and then he would, little break, then he'd do the Raja Yoga class. And I remember it was $15 to take just the Raja class, or the Hatha class, or the Raja class. $25 if you took both. And so I said, well, I'm taking both. And I paid him at $25, and I took that, and 6 weeks class series. And I was very attracted. And a couple things I remember from that stick out is I was attracted to Swami. I'd never met really on such a personal level a Swami. And so that struck me. And the other thing was he brought this little box with him, what turned out to be a folded up harmonium, and he played a chant. And I remember the first chant he played was, I'm the bubble, make me the sea. And I thought, oh, that was nice. You know, and he taught us how to meditate. And not that I was able to do it, but he certainly taught us. And but I was personally attracted to him, and I felt a magnetism. I'm not saying I liked him or said, but I could feel something. Whatever it was he had, I wanted. And so that was, in a sense, how we got started. And that class series ended after 6 weeks. And he had asked me right after the first class, he introduced himself to everybody, and I went up and introduced myself. And I said, yeah, I told him my name. And he said, well, how can I help you? And I said, I want to learn Kriya Yoga. And because you read the autobiography, and that's what stood out for me. A couple things stood out for me. Swami Yukteswar stood out for me, and I was very attracted. And Kriya Yoga stood out for me. And of course, Master stood out too, but he was in the background, you might say, writing this. And so I said, okay, I want to learn Kriya Yoga. So that's what I told Swami. I says, I want to learn Kriya Yoga. And he said, okay, I can do that. I can help you with that, but you need to do 3 things. And I've told this story umpteen times, I don't know, but I'll mention the 3 things he told me. He says, you got to start a daily sadhana. And I said, what's that? Meditate. And I said, okay, I'll try. Then he said, second thing, you need to study the teachings. I says, well, how do I do that? And he said, well, if you want to know the teachings, he recommended I take the self-realization fellowship lessons and other things. And I says, I can do that because I was a student, had been a student, recently graduated, but I can do that. And he said, the third thing is, this was the hard one. He said, the third thing is, I need to get to know you. And I thought, how do I do that? And he said, well, I just, I need to get to know you. And he says, why don't you come by to my flat, my apartment in San Francisco. We have a satsang in San Francisco at my apartment. I don't think he used the word satsang, but we have a meditation group or something like that on Thursday nights. And on Thursday nights, why don't you come? A group of us come and we get together. We'll have a chance to chat. And I said, okay. And he says, but I said, well, we're doing this class now. He says, when the class is over, that's what I said, I'll start coming, when the class series is over. I think he even recommended that. And he also said he had gatherings on Sunday, which he was doing at a place called the Cultural Fellowship Institute. His friend, Dr. Chaudhry, I can't remember, he was on Fulton. He was on, but I was not going to go somewhere on Sunday morning. I was usually recovering from Saturday night, but anyway, so I said, okay, and I started, after the class was over, I started going to his apartment. This would have been probably by December. And I started going, and it was from that I got to know Swami and what he was doing and it helped me, of course. I couldn't meditate at home very easily. I had a couple of roommates. It was chaotic. And plus, I won't blame it on them. It was me. I didn't have enough willpower. I could make 5 minutes. Even he asked me, how are you doing with your meditation? I said, I can't meditate half hour. He had recommended. And then he says, well, meditate 20 minutes. I can't meditate 20 minutes. He says, well, meditate 15 minutes. And I says, and he says, stop. Stop. How long can you meditate for? And I was a little embarrassed. I was going to say 5, which was about right. But I said, I can meditate for 15 minutes. He says, good, start there. And that's what we did, and I tried. And I can't say that I succeeded, but when I went to his apartment, I could, we have a, 20, 30-minute meditation, and I found I could meditate there, and that taught me something. And so then from there, everything else started to follow from that. And that's kind of a long-winded introduction to how I got here.
Thank you. So at that time, was there an Ananda Village? No, there was no Ananda Village at that time. He had, that winter, this would have been 1968, 1969, he had previously, in 67, he had purchased a piece of property with the Bald Mountain Association, his fellows, other people that he'd come to know, Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, and Dick Baker, and I can't remember the fifth guy's name, but anyway, then they had purchased his property, but there was bare land up in the Sierra Nevada foothills where Ananda Village is now, where our meditation retreat is now. That's the property that was purchased. And he, with his, friends and students, had begun constructing buildings there in the summer of 1968. And they were shells. They weren't completed yet, but they were shells that were protected from the weather. And
that was all that was there. But he still lived in San Francisco, and as nobody lived out on this property except for that winter. There were a couple of people from that group that had built in 1968 that had stayed over the winter there. Benai Preston and Tom Hopkins, Tom Dunks. They came and went. They weren't there all winter, but the one that stayed there all winter was Satya, Bill Cox, and he was there as caretaker. And but nobody else. And so this is how I ended up here, is that winter he began to talk about this property and how he wanted to do a cooperative community. He wanted to start a community. And he was in manuscript form, he had written how to, cooperative communities, how to build them and why. And but it was in manuscript form, on a mimeograph machine. He handed them out. He handed one to me, and I read it, and I thought, that's really interesting. And other people who were coming to those satsang, and a couple other people said they were interested. And he began to gather people together who might have some interest in this. And I went to one or two of those gatherings, but I was probably the youngest of anybody there. They were all older, and they would get into debates about different things of how a community might start and so on. And I thought, I don't know if I could do this or not. And I was an onlooker, you might say, to this. But then one day, one of those Thursday nights, we were, after the meditation, a little interchange that was happening afterwards, he came up to me and he says, what are you doing? In terms of work. He says, you got a job? What are you doing? And he rarely, that might have been the one time only, did he ever ask about my personal life. That wasn't an issue, But I says, no, I'm not. I'm just sort of between trying to figure out what to do, which I was, and I was, trying to figure out this job or that job, and everything was just, I don't want to do that. And he says, would you be willing to go up to this property and help get it in shape so that we could begin to use it come springtime when the weather's good? We could start using it for meditation retreats, and students here in the city could come up, and it would be. But I need some help. I have a few young guys out there but they really need help to get it going. Would you be willing to help me? And so it was I didn't think of it so much at the time, but that was a momentous question. Would you be willing to help me? And I didn't really think about it for more than a second or two. And I says, yeah, I'll help. And he says, oh, good. Maybe you could go up there. And now I did go up there with a couple others, people in that group. We took they had a school bus, the old converted school bus. We drove up, but it was in the middle of winter. It was snowing even. And went for the weekend, came back. And I said, well, it's not the time to go now. And I'll wait until springtime comes. And so that was in January. And springtime came, and and I wrapped up all my meager responsibilities. I didn't have a lot, and I had an old truck, and I put everything, put whatever belongings I wanted, which happened to be one box of possessions, an old army tent, a sleeping bag, and one box of food. I put it in the back of that truck and drove up, and I was not intending to stay. I didn't think beyond a month or two, but I ended up staying, and that I never left. And so there you could say I'm still here. And so that has got me here. And I found immediately, and I think that I got up here and I could meditate. I started meditating. I couldn't meditate in the city for very long, 5, 10, 15 minutes maximum. And I got to that meditation retreat, and in the right environment, I found my meditation practice. I got regular. There was really nothing else to do but work. And so there we were. And a small group of guys that were there, one woman, I think, only, and one kid, a little girl. And I think I was number 9. the ninth person there. There's one family of three, and so then 3 plus 5 others, and so then I was 9. And we fixed the place up, and it was rudimentary. And we got it ready for camping, which Swami wanted to have it ready for camping. So we'd have some sort of a retreat in May. That was April. And so we later on, about a month or two later, we started. And Swami then eventually himself moved up in about June sometime. So that was how I ended up here. And, that was an interesting time, very interesting time. We did not own the property of the village at that time. It was we only owned the meditation retreat, and then it began to grow. And people began coming, people in vans and buses and hitchhiking and at the retreat. And it began to cause tension with our neighbors. And there was feedback from the neighbors that Swami had bought the property with, that, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And too much is, this is beyond our original agreement that we bought this property. And so Swami, agreed to that, and we realized quickly if something was going to happen. And he had this vision, you see, wanting to create a community. Now, that original meditation group was started more as a meditation retreat, as a hermitage, ashram maybe, and it really wasn't suitable, really, for a community, although a community in a broader sense was starting to grow out of that. But he said, well, the times now seems like we're being forced to actually buy some property and start a community. Where in the world could we do that? And so there was a search, land search went out, we looked at different pieces of property, and we ended up with what's now Ananda Village. At that time, not as big as it is now, 285 acres, I think, originally, about that. And I think in early July, that's when Ananda Village started. So that was the beginning of a big adventure. I mean, obviously the retreat was a big adventure too. But personally, obviously my life had changed dramatically. And it was an opportunity, you see, to put one's ideals into action. I think that's what it was. I'm meditative, yes, but I was a young person of action. I wanted to do something. And I wanted to be handy. I had those ideals that are associated with counterculturalism back in that day were, living on the land and doing something to change society. How are you going to change society? You got to change yourself first, and a small group of people. And all of that was just idealistically attractive for me. And I thought, yes, let's make our mark here, and gathering people together to do that. So it was a very idealistic time. Not just me, other people too, and other people joined, came. It was chaotic, and there was no other word for it, I don't think. But there was energy, and it wasn't always positive, and there's a lot of, different things going on, but you'd have to say it was energy. And I think this is one of the things I always admired about Swami over the years. He had energy. He had tremendous will. He was a man of willpower, a man of energy, and the two go together. And he felt, I don't know if it was consciously done it this way, but he always was saying, get the energy moving, and try to keep the vibration high, and things will take care of themselves. This energy creates magnetism, but energy is also intelligent, has innately intelligence, and the thing is, you have to keep the vibration. It depends upon how that intelligence will be expressed. And so he was obviously able to deal with chaos, and I was able to deal with chaos, and everybody who was coming, it was very primitive. We were able to embrace a back to the land ideals. And so young people, energy, enthusiasm, idealism, you mix that all, and you have a piece of property, and you mix that all together, and something is going to happen. And it did. Now, it's interesting, though.
you might want to ask me a question, and I'm going to anticipate a question of bringing Swami into that picture. And it's a very, I mean, there's many different things that could be said on that, but in terms of how it related to me personally, Swami, as I said, I ended up being attracted because I was attracted to him. There's a magnetism there. It doesn't mean I liked him. I did like him, but it wasn't because of that. It wasn't because you liked him or this, but there was just something there that I felt the connection with. And I remember there was something at that first summer of 1969 at Ananda Village. It was very disorganized. Imagine you take 50 young people. There's no rules. You know, we're supposed to not drugs and alcohol, you know, not even the dog rule was part of it at that time. But but there was no format, there was no organization, just a bunch of people landing on a piece of property and let's make something of it. Well, you can imagine, it's just, you know, all over the map. But most of them, almost all, but I'd say few apples that were not as sweet as the others, but they were, most everybody was good intentioned. Let's put that, good intention, but all over the map in terms of ideals and what we ought to do, how to do it. So what you had, and there was no infrastructure on that property, and we had to do septics, you know, and there's no septic system. What are you going to do for water? And I think one spigot had water coming out of it. So people landed, and you had to be young, obviously, and to deal with it. But it was a lot of fun also, and some worked hard, some lazed about. But the problem was, Swami was extremely busy up at the old retreat, he was doing all the classes, having to raise money, writing books. And so this property where the village is, it was pretty much free form. A lot of people putting out a lot of energy. And that was the thing, it was a lot of energy. But it was undirected. And at the end of the summer, cold weather was starting to come. You know, you could see winter was coming and no shelter really. And I remember, and Swamiji, he called a meeting in the farmhouse that was there. And one of the points he wanted to make, and he made, I still remember it, because it was so chaotic. He advised people, a couple of things came out of that. He said, we need to get organized. He says, but more important than that is we need to be clear about what we're doing here. We have come, I've dedicated my life, and this property is to serving the work of our Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. You see, because there were people who had other ideas. You know, this Guru, that Guru, this spiritual path. Let's be eclectic, let's be universal. Let's not be narrow-minded and just follow one path, you see. There was that argument was going on, and it was very scattered, and it helped scatter it. He says, we're disciples. This community is for disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda. This property is dedicated in what we're doing here to his work. And that's why I've come here and what I'm doing. And he says, I want all of you to know, if this isn't going to be that, he says, I'm perfectly happy to walk away and I'll go do it somewhere else. But if it's not going to be that, that's what I'll do. But if we're going to do it, that's what it has to be. And he was very clear about it. And I think you see, we didn't have focus in that first year. We had ideals, but they were not in any particular focus. So he encouraged that, and he asked people, he says, now look, winter's coming. He encouraged people to go out, go to the city, make some money. We got to share the costs of all of this, because he was carrying all the workload with his classes at the meditation retreat. And in order to make this thing happen, we got a mortgage to pay. And so he encouraged people to go out, find jobs, make money, and in the springtime come back. And I remember something out of that experience, because he was so strong about this. He says, you know, if we're not going to do it here, I'm going to just go somewhere else. And I remember the thought went through my mind, oh, where are we going next? You see, it's not where Swami is going next. Where are we going next? Because I was going to go with him wherever he went. And it struck me. And Swami used this phrase many years later. He said about to a big group of us at a satsang, he says, "You have all hitched your wagon to my star." I don't know, Dambara, if you remember that. But that phrase stuck with me, it has ever since. And that's exactly what I had done. I had hitched my wagon to his star. And that it didn't mean, it wasn't personal. And it was his star, of course, to me, was Master's star. I always had felt, and this is how my relationship with Swami has been. I came, because of Master. Master was my guru, but Master was gone. He had died in 1952, and I always felt that I read that book, that light had flashed in my forehead, that immediately after reading that, coincidence, circumstances, karma, had directed me to Swami, and that Master had given me that. And so I said, that's my path. Now, there was a lot of people, by that time, I had now lived at the meditation retreat, and I continued to live at the meditation retreat for the first few years, that I had come because I had an interest in community, but by the time I was at the meditation retreat for a year or two, and I saw my spiritual life going deeper, that was what I wanted. I had somewhat lost interest in community. I liked the idea, but that wasn't it was just a means to an end. I could see my end is I wanted to be the yogi. I wanted to be a yogi. I wanted to meditate. That was what I was going to do. But you have to do something in the meantime. So whatever came up, whatever job, and I aligned myself with Swami, and ever after that you might say defined my relationship with Swami. If Swami wanted something, he'd say, "Jaya, would you do this?" Yes. Jaya, would you do? Yes. And that was what I did. I never particularly in the years, although I was around Swami and we did a lot of things and I was right there, but it was never personal. I didn't really even seek a personal relationship with Swami. Swami was my connection to Master, and in a sense, maybe still is my connection to Master, but I was like a past life. I must have been a soldier. He was the general, I was the private, or maybe I made it up to corporal, or maybe I was wherever I made it, or maybe he was a king and I was a servant somewhere, and he would say, "Jaya, would you do this? Would you do that?" And he would give, and that's what I'd do. And I was satisfied, because if I could please, that was what I wanted, you see. And I didn't need anything beyond that. And it's always been, I'm not fortunate, of course, put us in physical locales at a certain times of our life together. And especially in those first few years, of course, it was a very small group, a more intimate group. Eventually, of course, after a decade or so, it got big. And then I was very fortunate in the latter part of my life, the last 10 years of Swami's life. Much of it was spent in India, where he ended up asking Sadhana Devi and me to come to India to serve there. And that also was a small group. So I thought it was nice bookends, you might say, for working with him. And again, Swami would say, "Jaya, would you do this?" And okay, or would you do that? And in between, there was some of that as well, but it was the beginning, and then those ends were the more memorable to me in terms of my relationship with Swami. Now, in between, there were a lot of adventures, and they were building an Ananda community. Like I say, I wasn't all that interested in community at a certain point. I wanted to be a devotee, you see. But then, as fortune would have it, Swami wanted to create this community. And those of us who were here had a little bit of experience. We ended up, and I was handy, so ended up taking on the job of actually helping to build this community, which I was fortunate to be able to be a part of that, and have influence in certain areas of that. So that, in a sense, is a synopsis of my life here at Ananda Village, and particularly that which made it meaningful, my life here with Swami and as a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I had wanted to ask you, how do you hitch your wagon to Swami's star? But I think you answered it just by saying, yes, I will. I'll do that.
Well, it goes back. It goes back when, Swami says, Jaya, what are you doing? I said, oh, not much, Going in. He says, would you, I need help. Would you help me? And were you willing to help me? And I said, yes. Mm-hmm. And that, in a sense, that was it, and that was my relationship. I was going to help if I could help. Right. And I didn't, obviously I like Swami, but it wasn't about that. I remember riding to town a few times with Swami and doing different things, going out and walk with Swami. He didn't like to talk, to me at least. We'd go riding along in silence, he almost like discouraged it with me. Now with other people, I kind of envied other people. He'd like to have conversations, joking it. But with me, never, that was never part of it. I was like, and I know this sounds a little funny of me to say that, but it was like I was his servant in a way. Now I could have taken that in a bad way. And I don't, I'm just a servant. But actually it was honored too, because I recognized that he had something that I didn't have. Now, it doesn't mean I always thought he was right. I didn't always think he was right. I didn't always think he made the right decisions, and I had alternate decisions, but that wasn't anything to do with it. It was like, well, this is the decision he made. It might be a stupid thing, but I'm going to try my best. And sometimes he was right and I was stupid, but then sometimes I was right. But that wasn't about, it wasn't about that. It was like, it's like if the captain of the ship tells the sailor, hey, that needs to happen. You don't start debating it, you do it. And that's how it was with Swami was the captain of the ship, or the general of the army, or whatever it is. That's how I was. And I guess I have probably previous samskars from military lives. Maybe that why I was so fervently anti-war when I was in college. I don't know, a reaction. Anyway.
So now with so many people coming when Swami isn't in the body, they can hear stories like that of how it was being with Swami, but how would you talk to them about how you relate to Swami or relate to Ananda?
I mean, obviously, Swami used to say about his time with Master that when somebody would ask him a question tell him a story about Master, he couldn't think of a word to say. But once he got talking, then you remember this and you remember that. And I don't know, I don't think anybody can really capture who and what Swami was. Everybody sees life through their own window. Each disciple of Master probably saw Master in a particular way. And of course, we frame people according to our own inner prejudices, biases, thoughts, needs. And I think Swami was like that too. And I think a vision of Swami, he was who he was. I always thought of him as very impersonal, and he said he's impersonal to himself, about himself, but very personal with other people. Now, I can't say that he was very personal with me, because we didn't relate that way, but I knew that he cared, you see. He was after my welfare, but he was, I think I mentioned earlier that when I read the autobiography, I was very much attracted, more than being attracted to Master at first, I was attracted to Swami Shri Yukteswar. And I've heard other people say that, that I recognized Master though as, this is after I got to know Swami and he heard the stories, I recognized Master as my guru, and I took Master as my guru, very loyal to that.
But that before that, I was, Yogananda, his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, was the epitome in my mind of what it meant to be a guru. Oh, that's what a guru is. And I was attracted to that, the discipline. You know, I needed somebody to discipline me, because I was in need of that, really. I was undisciplined in a lot of different ways, and so I was attracted to that. I think Swami picked up on that, and he was a little bit very impersonal. And Jaya, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, and not a jokester or anybody, whereas I noticed with other people, he could be extremely sweet and kind and courteous, but I noticed not only to me is that when the young monks, the young men, he was a little bit more strict, and I think maybe it was his own monastic training. He felt a need to approach us that way, and probably we needed that that way. But he was also, if there was an issue of personalness. He could be, you know, he took interest. He took interest. But he is an interesting man, just in terms of humanity, a human with a personality. He had a personality distinctly. And he, of course, always used to say, it's something I just have to be responsible for this entity known as Kriyananda, but not identified with it. But definitely he was very distinct. I remember he used to always read those P.G. Woodhouse, you remember that, Dambara? That was P.G. Woodhouse. I hated P.G. Woodhouse. And I'd go, oh, God. But you know, by the time he passed on, I actually got to like P.G. Woodhouse. I think it was probably because he enjoyed it so much, you know, because I saw those P.G. Woodhouse stories, these snobby English aristocrats, you know, and I just couldn't, and I was a little bit of the working man, blue collar, you know, proletariat, ready to dump them in the ocean. And that was sort of my mentality, politically wise. But it didn't matter, you know. So, but he had all sorts of these enthusiasms, and I came to appreciate them. But I can't say that I liked them. You know, as time went on, I came to appreciate it. And he had his ways. He was very, very, very different. Then, you see, now he had grown up into a well-to-do family, and he had some scars of royalty. I mean, I feel pretty sure in the past lifetimes he must have been royalty of some sort. And he was also extremely accomplished spiritually. And but whereas I came from a very different background, and so it took me a while. And so probably for the first, 10, 15 years, it was a matter of bridging those things. But then I came to appreciate it, because I realized I lacked that. You have to remember, in those days, all of us were young, you know. Remember the phrase, don't trust anybody over 30?
Yeah.
Well, most of us were under 30, you know, and Swami was older, of course. And so in a sense, we reflected that, the community reflected that, and I certainly was young and indisciplined and undisciplined, and so consequently, I needed to grow out of it. I was immature in that way, socially immature. I need to grow up and represent, which I don't know if Swami foresaw. I think he did, because he did appoint me as a minister in 1978. And I didn't think I had any potential for that at all. It scared me to death, having to get up there and talk at a Sunday service. Oh my God, you know. But he must have seen some potential, but I had to, like I say, I had to mature. I had to get appropriate, you know, I had to be socially improved, and all of these things which goes into becoming more mature and growing up had to happen. But I have to admit, Swamiji, in a lot of us, he was very, very patient. That was a lesson to me, because in the years that passed, of course, I did become a minister in 1978, and then in 1989 he appointed me as Kriyacharya. And at that time, only Jyotish was another Kriyacharya, and so I guess after Jyotish, I was the second one. And responsibility comes with that. You have to start, and of course I had become village manager and
you know, a lot of different things here. So I just couldn't be so casual, you might say, about how I interacted with people, my language, and it was training, really. And I couldn't see it at that time because I couldn't see the future. Maybe Swami did, I don't know. But I was being trained, and slowly I became a, you know, representative of these, sharing these teachings. I didn't want to do it, never have wanted to do it, but I did want to serve Master, you see. And at a certain age, you do a certain, your service expresses itself in a certain way. So I was involved with planning the community, managing the community, construction of the community, building infrastructure, all of those things that in relating to the government, which also demanded a certain diplomacy. That's why learning to be diplomatic. All of these skills have come in very handy in representing Master's teachings. And as time went by, I moved out of that world, became more involved in the ministerial side of things and building the Sangha up. And as time went by, Sadhana Devi were, Swami says, Jaya, would you go to Rhode Island? Now, Sadhana Devi, she could tell her side of that story, but he didn't give Sadhana Devi much of a choice. Told her to go to Rhode Island. She can speak for herself, but he didn't even ask me necessarily. He just told me, "Oh, you're going to go to Rhode Island," which I took as a compliment actually, because he didn't bother to ask. And I was sort of, it's like he used to say, "Would you thank your own mother?" You know, in other words, it's an Indian expression. He says, "You don't thank your own mother because you're so tight. There's no need for thanks." And at Swami, I always was somewhat flattered that he would not ask me. And the same thing happened when we were in Rhode Island, when we ended up going to India. He assigned us to go to, now he asked Sadhana Devi, but he didn't ask me. He just said, "I want you to come to India." Okay, I was going to India, and just like I was going to Rhode Island, and to start to work on the East Coast, in Rhode Island's case, go to India to help build work in India. And I did ask him, not then, but I did later, a little later. I asked him, "Well, Swami, what do you want me to do here? I mean, I'm a foreigner in India. What am I going to do here?" And he just sort of, in a sort of impatient look, and he just sort of looked at me. He says, "I want you to teach." You know, he's like, "Why are you even asking me this question?" You know, this sort of thing. And that's what I did. I've been doing. He says, and the same thing. He said, we didn't have these long conversations. It wasn't my karma to have long conversations with him. He told me what to do. I'd ask for instructions, and he'd tell me, you know, okay, X, Y, Z, if necessary. But even then, he was sort of assuming that I'd figure it out for myself. But when he said we were to go to Rhode Island, he says, "I want you to go to Rhode Island." Well, I had lunch with him that day by chance it was a social function, so by chance I was sitting on the other side of the table from him. I says, "Oh, good, you know, he wants me to go to Rhode Island." So I says, and he was eating his lunch, and sometimes they would put people that were older members around him at these social occasions because new people just wouldn't let him eat. You know, they would be so on him. And he liked to just focus, and it was expected that those of us who were longer term and knew him would let him rest in peace for a moment. But I had my opportunity, so I was going to ask him. I said, "Swamiji, you want us to go to Rhode Island?" "That's okay, we're going to go." I says, "Well, what do you want us to do? What should we do?" Now, it sounds like a logical question, but he just had, again, he got that impatient look on his face. He says, "Look for opportunities and act on them." And he went back to eating his lunch. I already know, obvious message, but don't bother me anymore about some stupid question. Simple. What else are you going to do? But actually, now I'm not going to give you a lecture on this, but actually, embodied in that phrase, there's a lot. I give a long talk on those. Look for opportunities and act on them. And so anyway, that's what we did. And then we ended up in India too, and then there was lots of opportunities out there. And, then I ended up down in Pune, and he wanted me to go to Pune, and anyway, we ended up there. And so...
There's probably much to say about India.
Oh, yes, there is. I did go, Sadhana Devi went to India in 2006. We had gone to visit Swamiji in 2005 because he had been in India for about 2 years and I hadn't seen him in that period of time. So other people had been making pilgrimages to India to go visit him. So Sadhana Devi, myself, and Om Prakash and Prem Shanti, who were our co-leaders there in Rhode Island, we made a pilgrimage and we went and saw him. And that was the first thing he asked when he saw it. Jaya, I want you to come to India. And which was a little bit hard on Prem Shanti and Om Prakash because it made we had to leave and they were left with holding the reins there by themselves. But we went, and so that was in 2005, we went on that pilgrimage, and in a couple of months later, which was in February 2006, I shifted there. Sadhana came about 2 months later. And that was 2006, and now it's 2022. So that's 16 years has been passed since that time. And most of that time has been spent in India, although lately with COVID, I've been here and, and other things have intervened. But I spent most of that time has been spent in India, and I had been to India in 1995 on a pilgrimage to the holy sites of Masters, associated with Master's life. And I went there not eagerly because I admired the Indian culture, I admired the literature, I admired the spiritual tradition, but modern India is not necessarily something I admired, although I admire the people. People are fantastic, but the situation in India is difficult. It can be, and I didn't really want to go for that reason. But once there, and listening to Swami, wanting to spread Master's teachings to the land of his birth, I felt a sense of duty, and this is what Swami wanted. Very, very dearly wanted. And we had asked him. We said, Swamiji, what do you want us to do here? A group of us had asked him, and he said, what's our mission, you might say? And he said, our mission here is to share the teachings of our Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, his name and his teachings, and spread it more widely in the land of his birth. That's it. Make his name and his teachings better known. And I thought, yes, I can do that. And I could see a sense of duty out of that. And I had been trained up in that point. I had all different aspects. Looking back, I says, I'm trained to do this. I can share. And that's what we did, is me, and others, the Dharmadas, Nirmala, Dhyana, others, Daya, Keshav, we've all of us taken this on as a mission, and to spread the teachings and share them with other people. And that became my work, others as well, as I say, is since then. And I've found the Indian audience extremely, extremely receptive and enthusiastic. And obviously we're sharing teachings that are from their tradition. And at first, the thought was in my mind, probably others as well, isn't this a little bit like taking coals to Newcastle, these teachings? But no, it wasn't that way at all. The modern Indian population is somewhat lost touch with these ancient traditions, and much of what we say to the audiences, not all, some are very conversant, obviously, but in terms of the spiritual teachings, the philosophy, even the history to some degree, a lot of the young people know nothing about it. They don't learn it in school. Schools are very, very secular, and oftentimes multiple generations have passed that I would ask people, what's this religious holiday all about? I always find that fascinating. There's a festival day every week practically in India celebrating some spiritual occasion. And so I'd always ask, what is this? What is this? And curiosity. And they'd often say, I don't know. My family just always practiced these things, and I just did what my family did.
Sounds a lot like
But they
America to me.
didn't have the knowledge to explain what it was about. And so that was an eye-opener to me. Now some did, of course, and you picked out those, and they would ask you. And so then we would, so I found it very fascinating culturally, and since in college I was actually an anthropology student, so I saw myself as doing field work, anthropological field work. I joked about that. And here I am, and actually my whole life at Ananda Village, as starting this community, was an anthropological field work. And but India's a marvelous country, and very, very deep. But yet, modern India has a lot of problems it has to work through. It's going through the challenges of materialism, the changes that are taking place, and you can see in the modern England that they have difficulties that they're having to overcome, and they look to the West as a model in many ways. And of course, Master said that the West has many lessons of material efficiency that it can teach India, and at the same way, India is the guru of the world that has many spiritual lessons can teach us in the West, and that the future is a bringing together the best of the East and the best of the West. And taking that and going out, I found that I was very well received. Dhyanaji, and I traveled up and down, crisscross India to all the major metros and cities, sharing these teachings, and I thought, you're an American? Is that right? Is that going to accept that for American? But embedded in the Indian culture is a respect for people that are older, respect for people who have experience, respect because we've been long-term, lifelong disciples of this great guru, respect for Swami Kriyananda as a direct disciple, respect for us as being involved in this work, and that we actually have something to offer. And we've made it a point, and what the Indian audience wants now, in my experience, is they want practical application of the teachings. And what embodies the work of Paramahansa Yogananda but that? How to take these ancient traditions and not just quote slokas, like, you go into the temples and there's some guy droning on there, they don't want that anymore. Not the modern young people. They want to know, how is this going to affect and make my life better? How am I going to be able to improve my relationships, my education, my day-to-day life? All of these things. And that's exactly what Ananda has, you could say, to offer. And this is what we do here in all of Ananda Village, in this creation of this community, is taking the spiritual principles of Paramahansa Yogananda and making them practical and showing how they can be demonstrated in day-to-day life. And that's exactly what Ananda is about. And we take that, and we have taken that to India, and that's what we share with people. Now we can also, teach the Yoga Sutras, and we can go into the symbolism of the Bhagavad Gita, and we do. And people find that fascinating. But on basic sharing of introductory lectures, people want to know, how is Kriya Yoga going to help me? How is it going to improve my life? Because this is what they are facing. And I wouldn't say India is a third world country, because it's certainly not that. But there are elements that are third world in India. And again, everything in India is a broad spectrum. You have the very, very poor, and you have the opulently rich. And the spread is very wide in everything. It's a land of where the senses, you got tremendous tamas and tremendous sattva on both ends of the spectrum. The colors are vibrant, everything is magnified and made wide in the spectrum. And if it's not, it's like they say about the Mahabharata, they say if it's not in the Mahabharata, it doesn't exist. And it's the same thing about India. If it's not, if it's not in India, it doesn't exist. Everything is there, and I love the culture and the people, and I could say I love the country too. But the modern expression of that can be, oh my God! But I think I've been trained for it. All of us, a lot of them have been trained for it, because I came here to Ananda Village at a time when it was chaos. We had to from scratch, and I could deal with that. I enjoyed it actually, and India's disorganized. I could deal with that, and so it's chaotic and this. And I was drawn to study of anthropology because I liked that concept of just going out there with the people, and so in a sense, it's a good fit.
Is there any parting word you would offer? Any advice you'd offer?
Well, I think that's a good question too, but maybe in a way that it's a little different than you might be asking, because we're at a point right now where I've been here, Ananda Associate, 1968. Now it's that's 54 years it'll be this year, having met Swami. Ananda's, you could say that's as old as Ananda is. And so we as an organization need to and are actively passing this tradition on to the next generations. I think that's happening already and has been happening. And we have to, and it's not going to be passed on intellectually. We have to pass it on by attunement, getting people to understand the spirit of what we're doing. Swami always used to, have those catchphrases, people are more important than things, where there's Dharma, there's victory. We have to show it in reality, in day-to-day activity, getting a new generation of people inspired. And I think that has applied to my personal life. Is the important, and as a teacher, is you have to always try to keep the inspiration high. Don't let things pull you down. They try, and they will sometimes succeed momentarily, but you keep the inspiration up, and then you pass that inspiration to others. And I don't think passing on the Ananda tradition can be defined in terms of specifics, because every generation is going to express ideals and express inspiration in their own way, and they have to. You can't keep a form and just think that form is going to be what the answer is, because 100 years from now it's probably not so. But you do need to have the spirit of what are the joyful qualities when we study the lives of Master, we study the lives of Swami, and this generation too, how we've expressed it. And that's what we're trying to get people to tune in, to get the spirit of what Ananda is. We're reaching out to people, showing how these teachings can affect people in their daily lives, improve their daily lives, and not turn it into a book study class and turn it into something that's living and trying to keep it living. But it's going to depend upon individuals coming along who elevate and raise their consciousness. We really, if we want Ananda to succeed, which I hope we can do, but not just for our sake of Ananda, but for Master's teachings to succeed and permeate into culture, and permeate into the years to come, to guide future generations. I think it's destined to that, but it has to change the lives of individuals. If it doesn't make saints, I don't know if you could say it's a successful work. And I think Master's work has created saints. Master's created saints, but I think if Ananda wants to continue down through the generations, our job is to inspire saints. Now, I don't think any of us can create saints. We have our own lives that we have to, but at least saintly people need to be carrying forward this work. And we start with each one of us ourselves, our own spiritual duty to our Guru, to our Guru's legacy, to our Guru's mission that has been given to us, but to our own souls as well on a deeper level, is to raise our consciousness and keep that consciousness high. And we do our best and try to be an expression. And going back to where we started, when I was a teenager, I wanted to do something. I wanted to, I was tired, and even when I got out of school, I thought, I want to put my ideals into action. I have to, in order to do that though, and I don't know if I have enough time to really explain what I mean here though, it takes sacrifice. Be willing to sacrifice. Now, sacrifice can be fun. I don't mean sacrifice with a grim face. What we're talking about is sacrificing likes and dislikes, sacrificing pettiness, sacrificing ego. Be willing to sacrifice your body if necessary, but it doesn't always have to be necessary, but willing to do what's necessary to put those ideals into action and to make them real. That was always something when I was growing up as a young person. I want to be real. I want people to be real. I mean, what does that mean? Well, I think it comes down to that, is being true to who your ideals are and being willing to sacrifice joyfully, if possible, for those ideals. But if you don't have ideals, and if you're not willing to pay the price for whatever those ideals are, what are they? What are they? And how are they going to inspire other people, other generations, that they were willing to put their life on the line, but yet in the doing of that, you find joy. It's the secret. It looks, oh my God, I don't want to do that. But that's the secret. And is that you find the joy in the doing. But it's sometimes from the outside, when you're approaching it, you think, oh, I can't do that. Why? That's where our real, giving up that ego, giving up those little petty stuff, the whims and fancies, as Master said. And God, I've had a lot of them. And I still do, I guess. But little by little, we shed them. And so it would take to have the courage to do that. Live to your ideals, what I'd say. Be willing to have ideals. I mean, you should have. I hope we have ideals. But then willing to put them into action and do something about them. And get a lot of energy going. Have ideals. And remember that energy has its magnetism and has its intelligence. Don't try to... It's not our job to put every little thing in its proper box. I think, and I guess I'll end on this, is something Swami said to us more than one time in India. He said very seriously, he said, remember, this is not your work. It's Master's work. This is not my work. Babaji's work. It's Babaji's work we do. It's not ours. It's not mine. We do it for him. And he will guide us. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.